Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering my pick for the best archer build in Baldur's Gate 3. Archery is one of the most powerful strategies available in Baldur's Gate 3. From a purely strategic perspective, this is just one of the very best things that you can be doing. Because it's not dependent on your positioning, you can shoot anyone pretty much anywhere on the battlefield, and you can act from perfect safety because you're far away from the enemies. In addition, the items and abilities that Baldur's Gate provides for archers are some of the highest quality that any classes get access to, so it's an extremely well-supported and conceptually extremely powerful strategy, making it one of the very best characters to play through Honor Mode with. This build is one of my absolute top picks for Honor Mode. It was included in my list of the very best builds for Honor Mode, and because of its incredible damage, the extreme ease with which it plays, and the extreme safety with which you can output that incredible damage, I think it makes an absolutely devastating addition to the arsenal of any party, and is also, in my opinion, one of the very best builds for solo play, and one of the easiest ways to get a solo Honor Mode win, if that's something that you want to do. This is an update video to my previous video of the same name, because I wanted to bring this build into the modern era of Baldur's Gate 3 and incorporate all the lessons that we've learned over a year of character optimization, and because my previous video did contain one error which I wanted to correct. I do have to include one disclaimer that this video is being recorded shortly before the launch of patch 7, so it is possible that some things will change in patch 7, but I think it is highly unlikely that any of the core mechanics of this character change, and so you should be able to build it exactly as presented here, even after the patch. Alright, let's get to the build. We're using Astarion as the example character here, because he is the rogue of the party, and this is in part a rogue build. But if you're building this as a custom character, then I suggest Wood Elf for the bonus movement speed. Mobility is of course incredibly important for archers, especially in the early game, to be able to stay out of range of melee enemies. Halfling for the ability to reroll ones. One of the best things about this character is that it is so resistant to bad luck and poor die rolls. Halfling's ability to reroll ones can make that even better and make this character extremely safe to play, or Gnome for the advantage on mental saving throws, because this character is very, very difficult to kill through physical damage, thanks to its distance, spacing, and high armor class and good defenses. So the only thing that can usually lose you most fights is if you get hit by a debilitating mental effect, like a hold person, for example. Gnome is resistant to those, so it gives you a lot more safety. Duergar for out-of-combat invisibility is of course also excellent. This character does very well when it's invisible and can position itself before combat so that enemies can't reach it, so all of those make excellent options. Right from the beginning of the game, we have a very important choice to make, whether to begin as a rogue with our first level, or begin as a ranger. We're going to be taking levels in both, and we really want to hit third level in Rogue for the subclass abilities of the Rogue levels we'll be taking, and fifth level in Ranger for the subclass abilities and also the extra attack feat, and we want both of those levels as soon as possible. From a pure combat power standpoint, I think that slightly superior is to take 5 levels of Ranger all in a row as your first 5 levels, if you don't care about any out-of-combat utility. But for actual play in practice, I recommend starting with 1 Rogue level, and then we're going to take our Ranger levels, because that just gets us expertise in sleight of hand, it gets you expertise in stealth, and a lot of other awesome things that Rogues get to start with. It just makes your whole playthrough so much smoother if you have the incredible skill access that Rogues have available, because you can open locks, you can disarm traps, and do all the things that rogues are great at doing, and since this character is going to be doing that for your party, you might as well be as good at it as possible. So I'm going to recommend starting with a rogue level. And for our ability scores, one of the great things about this character is we can get away with being as greedy as possible, taking as our ability scores 17 in dexterity, 16 in constitution, and 15 in wisdom. This gives us the maximum possible 3 scores that we can take at level 1. You can't get 3 scores any higher than this, and will allow us to very quickly reach the highest level of ability scores that any character can get. This character is what's called single attribute dependent, or SAD. The only thing you care about is your dexterity, so we basically just get to invest everything in increasing that as much as possible. If the odd numbers offend you, you can drop dexterity to 16, wisdom to 14, and take 12 points in strength for a little early game jump distance. Generally speaking, I don't think it particularly matters to do that, so you can start with the odd numbers, or you can respec later to this attribute spread, whatever makes you happier. For your skill proficiencies here, you definitely want expertise in sleight of hand. That's one of the reasons we took Rogue, because that is just a very powerful tool in Baldur's Gate. Makes sure you get good loot. And expertise in stealth. This character will be able to make stealth checks later on, and they will be an important tool in your arsenal, so having expertise in stealth just makes you so much better at it. This character also, if you're playing as Astarion, you do start with perception proficiency. If you know you're not planning to do any stealth, then you could take expertise in perception, or you could even take expertise in persuasion and use this character as a party face in order to be better at dialogue checks. Even with 8 charisma, if you have expertise in persuasion, you'll still pass most persuasion checks pretty easily. So those are some options for customizing the character, but this is the attribute spread that I would recommend primarily. That's all the decisions that we have to make at level 1. Let's move on to level 2. At character level 2, we're going to immediately multi-class and start taking levels in Ranger. This gets us to our extra attack feature as soon as we possibly can, and that's what's going to give us the most consistent and powerful damage output. It also gets us to our feat pretty early, so I like taking 5 levels of Ranger after 1 level of Rogue. Some people prefer going 3 and 3 first, but since that delays your feat and your extra attack, I tend to think that you will prefer to take the 5 Ranger levels. It just makes your character play through the game much more smoothly, because you get access to your power spikes on a smoother curve rather than all at once near level 8. So, we're taking a level of Ranger as our second level, and for our favored enemy selection here, we're going to take Bounty Hunter. It's basically a choice. None of these favored enemy selections matter that much, so it's basically a choice between Bounty Hunter and Ranger Knight. Ranger Knight gives us access to heavy armor proficiency. It can let you use the heavy armor helmet, and there are some sets of heavy armor that are reasonably useful for this character, but for the most part you will prefer medium or light armor. You're a high dexterity build, so it'll actually give you more armor class if you're in one of the uncapped medium armor sets than heavy armor will. But Ranger Knight can give you more gear options, and Bounty Hunter has a little bit of utility in the early game, because Ensnaring Strike is a pretty good spell in the early game. Even with relatively low wisdom, enemies who have disadvantage against the save will fail it a lot. I think that Bounty Hunter plays out a little smoother, but either of those selections are fine. For our Natural Explorer selection, we're going to take Wasteland Wanderer Fire, because fire resistance to fire damage is really valuable. There's tons of fire damage in the game. It's the most common elemental damage type, and so adding in resistance to fire damage just makes us so much more resilient. We're already really hard to kill just because of our high armor class and positioning with physical damage, so resisting elemental damage makes the character much safer. We get to take an additional skill selection here, and it doesn't really matter what you pick at this point, unless this character is your party face, in which case you probably want to pick up Insight, but none of these other skills matter. You can take Survival just because it saves you from having to dig around for the chests. Even though you don't need Survival to find them, you can just use the shovel where they are, even if your character fails a Survival check. This does save you clicks, so I tend to like to pick it up just because I'm very lazy. At level 3, we're going to continue to take levels in Ranger, and we get our fighting style. We're going to take, of course, because we're an archer build, the archery fighting style. And not only is this great, because it's a +2 bonus to ranged weapon attacks and makes your attacks much more consistent, it's worth mentioning that this is one of the things that makes archers so good in Baldur's Gate. No other way of fighting gets such a huge bonus to their hit chance, and archery fighters, just characters who are using bow attacks, can get the archery fighting style, get a +2 bonus, and just hit all their attacks much more consistently. This also combines extremely well with the sharpshooter feat to make it more accurate and do more damage, offsetting the penalty of sharpshooter. But the archery fighting style is just one of the most powerful class features in the game, quietly, because +2 to all of your attacks is an incredible bonus to your average damage, and one of the reasons that it's so good to gain levels of Ranger as early as possible. For our spell selection here, we're going to take Hunter's Mark. We can use our bonus action to boost up our damage, which is extremely powerful. And we'll take Ensnaring Strike because we took Bounty Hunter. We can use this against enemies that we want to lock down. Ensnare immobilizes them, so it can be pretty useful in the early game. Later on, we will swap out this spell for other spells, but Hunter's Mark increases our damage output, and Ensnaring Strike is good for crowd control, so having access to both of those gives us options depending on which type of spell we need for a given encounter. At level 4, we're going to take our third level of Ranger, and for our subclass, we're going to take the Gloomstalker. Gloomstalker Ranger is one of the most front-loaded subclasses in the game. It gets a ton of incredibly powerful abilities all at once as soon as you enter the Gloomstalker Ranger. First up, you get Dread Ambusher, which gives you a +3 bonus to initiative. Combined with being a dexterity-based character and having high initiative, and even if you don't buy any initiative gear, you're still going to go before just about every enemy in the entire game. This feature lets us skip on taking Alert and still go first in just about every encounter in Honor Mode. It lets us pass off the initiative boosting gear to our allies in order to make them more effective, and +3 bonus to initiative is incredibly powerful for a character that does tons of burst damage, as this character does. You also get faster on the first turn of combat, allowing you to position yourself better, and this tooltip is very poorly written, but you can make an attack that deals an additional 1d8 damage. What it doesn't say is that this is a whole extra attack. This is an additional attack that doesn't take any kind of action to use. So basically we get to do a whole additional attack with bonus damage on the first round of combat. We always go first, and so we're going to be able to quickly blow up the most dangerous enemies in any given combat because of the amount of front-loaded damage that we get from being a Gloomstalker Ranger. We also can see in the dark up to 80 feet, which is pretty good. This character wants to be in the dark a lot, so if you're a race that doesn't naturally have dark vision, the superior dark vision is actually pretty good. Means that you can hide in shadows and be obscured, and fight enemies without having to use any light source, so that's excellent. You can also hide as a bonus action, which will allow you to shoot an enemy and then go and hide, preventing them from retaliating in any way, or hide before firing your arrow to gain advantage on the attack. So that gives you a ton of power as well. And you can become invisible as an action as long as you're obscured. This is once per long rest, but this will let you start encounters from the most advantageous location by invisibly sneaking to high ground or near dangerous enemies, or on the opposite side of the enemies from the rest of your party, so that the enemies have to split their focus or decide which way to run, and you can pick them off at your leisure. All of these abilities synergize incredibly well, and the insane burst damage that you get from Dread Ambusher just lets you flatten enemies before they go. For our spell selection here, if your party doesn't have Longstrider, you definitely need to take Longstrider somewhere in your party. It just makes your whole party 10 feet faster. It's a ritual spell, so it doesn't take a spell slot, and is critically important for every party to have. Enhanced Sleep also could improve your mobility, and if you have access to both of those on other characters, then Fog Cloud is very good. This is another concentration spell, but lets you just blind enemies to gain advantage on attacks against them. Any enemy who's locked in place can be absolutely crushed if you land a Fog Cloud on them. At character level 5, we're going to take our 4th level of Ranger, although I will note that you could, if you wanted to, deviate and take 3 levels of Rogue at this point. I just prefer the Ranger levels. And we're going to take a feat. For our first feat, I already have mentioned it in this build video, we're going to take Sharpshooter. Sharpshooter is core to every archery build. It's what allows you to do so much damage. The -5 penalty to your attacks sounds bad, but we're offsetting 2 points of that with the archery fighting style, and so many of our attacks are made with advantage because we have bonus action hide, so we can hide and make our attacks. You can attack from high ground very easily because you can sneak to a good position and gain advantage that way. So you should be able to offset these penalties quite easily, still land your attacks, and deal an additional 10 damage. Since we have our extra Gloomstalker attack, we're getting 20 damage out of this in the first turn of combat, and this just continues to provide incredible damage value throughout the entire game. I highly recommend taking it early. You will sometimes see the advice not to take Sharpshooter as your first feat, but the amount of damage that it does as a percentage of enemy health at this point in the game is massive, because enemies have relatively low health. So even if you miss a couple more attacks, you're going to kill enemies much faster on average with early Sharpshooter. As a rule of thumb, you should turn off this. You should toggle off Sharpshooter if your hit chance is 25% or lower, or if enemies are at low health and you don't need the extra damage. Otherwise, just leave it on all the time. Then, at our 5th level of Ranger, we get the extra attack feature, letting us make 2 attacks for every attack action, or 3 attacks in the opening round of combat, which increases our damage output immensely, obviously. It effectively doubles it. Extra attack is so good for the obvious reasons. It also lets us apply Sharpshooter more often, and any damage riders we have. You get the idea about how good this ability is, and that's why we rushed for it. We also get Misty Step from being a 5th level Gloomstalker Ranger, which is a pretty nice spell to have as a bonus action. This is very useful for positioning, helps us get out of the way, and we don't have to spend any build resources on selecting it. For our level 2 spell selection, we're going to take Spike Growth, because this is still just a very useful spell to have even later on in the game. You can lock down enemies in areas with it pretty easily. If you already have another character, like a Druid or Nature Cleric who has Spike Growth, then you can pick up Silence, because as a ritual spell, this can be used outside of combat without spending a spell slot on it, and then lock down an enemy spellcaster, preventing them from acting. Pass Without Trace is also worth mentioning. If you intend to do greater invisibility shenanigans with this character, have another party member with greater invisibility, then this character can have Pass Without Trace on themselves to make them even better at the stealth checks. The way that greater invisibility works in Baldur's Gate is you have to make escalating stealth checks every time you attack before enemies notice you. So Pass Without Trace as a bonus to your stealth checks lets you abuse the enemy AI, killing them before you ever enter combat, or before they ever notice you, and then you don't even have to play the game, you just kill any enemies before they ever see you. Then, at character level 7, we're going to go back into Rogue. This gives us Cunning Action Dash and Disengage, which makes us significantly more mobile around the battlefield. Cunning Action Dash, of course, is incredible for archers, because it lets you spend your bonus action to double your movement speed, which means that you can kite enemies backwards away from the battle. If things are going badly, you can just use your movement speed. You can use triple your movement speed to just run away and disengage from combat. Don't underestimate the strategy of just run away from combats that are going badly. That will save your honor mode runs more than once if you remember to do it and have characters who are appropriately mobile to take advantage of that. Then, at character level 8, we take our 3rd level of Rogue, and we get to pick our Rogue subclass, which is, of course, the Assassin Rogue. Assassin Rogues get advantage against creatures that haven't taken a turn yet. This is going to let us trigger our sneak attack against those creatures, and also just always attack with advantage, so we're going to hit even more reliably, landing our sharpshooter attacks, and so on. And we'll always win initiative, because we're a dexterity character that has the incredibly powerful tools given to us by the Gloomstalker Ranger as well. So we have amazing initiative, we're always going to win initiative, go before the enemies and have advantage on all our attacks, and if we surprised them by entering combat by dealing damage to them from stealth, then all of our attacks are going to be critical hits. So we're going to be making 3 attacks baseline, more if we have haste or bloodlust elixirs, in the opening round of combat, all of which are going to be automatic critical hits, which is enough to just drop any enemy in the game from full to 0, basically, or at least put them into a pretty bad position where the rest of your party can play cleanup, or where this character in a subsequent turn can just take them out after hiding and preventing the enemies from retaliating. It makes this playstyle incredibly easy because you just never have to face the most powerful enemies in any given encounter. They're just dead before the encounter starts, because automatic criticals with sharpshooter damage and all your additional attacks and damage are incredibly strong and will just one-shot anything that would potentially pose a threat to you before you have to fight them. You also restore your action and bonus action at the start of combat, so you can fire an attack before combat starts and then fire another attack. So you basically get a whole extra attack at the beginning of combat and effectively make 5 attacks in the first round of combat, which is going to just obliterate even the toughest enemies in the game. Character level 9. We are going to take our 4th level of Rogue, because of course we need to get an extra feat. We've been playing with relatively low dexterity up to this point, and relying on our advantage, bonuses from Bless, and potential buffs from allies, and the archery fighting style in order to hit our shots. So we're very happy to get another feat, and improve our ability scores up to 18 and 16. That just gives us the maximum possible numbers for our ability scores, evening out the odd numbers and making this character much more efficient. Then, at this next level, rather than take another level in Rogue or Ranger, we are going to deviate yet another time and take levels in yet a 3rd class. That class, of course, is going to be Fighter. Fighter gets us another fighting style pick, which is going to be the defense fighting style, increasing our armor class even further. Our armor class is really key to this character, and we can increase it quite high. So adding the defense fighting style can give us armor in the mid-20s or even low 30s, depending on our equipment, which means that enemies will never target you, and even if they do, they will miss. But mostly we're taking Fighter for the level 2 Fighter feature, Action Surge. Action Surge lets us make a whole additional round of attacks in the opening round of combat. So now we can make 2 attacks before combat starts with extra attack. We can make then an additional 3 attacks in the opening round of combat, and then use Action Surge for 2 more attacks. So we have up to 7 attacks, 5 of which are automatic criticals, and that's before we get haste or bloodlust attacks from an ally or anything along those lines. So the incredible amount of burst damage that this character can deliver is second to basically none other in the game, because critical hits are so powerful and we just get them automatically. Finally, at Fighter level 3, we are going to go into Battle Master Fighter. You could take Champion Fighter, because critical hit chance is good for this character, increasing your chance to critical hit, and we will be picking up gear for critical hit chance improvements. In general, I prefer Battle Master Fighter, though. It both gives you more options for how you're going to take combats. You can lock down enemies with menacing attack, make sure that you're landing your most important shots with precision attack, and potentially knock enemies over cliffs with pushing attack, or keep them prone on the ground with trip attack. You're going to want to take either of those. Disarming attack is also pretty good in the late game. Menacing and precision I would highly recommend taking both of, and then you're going to choose between disarming, trip, and push, depending on whether you have those effects elsewhere in your party. As a generically powerful choice, I think disarming is best in the late game, because it really shuts down some late game enemies. But precision attack means that you don't miss your important attacks, and this gives you a bunch of additional damage, because you can add a d8 to your important shots, and that d8 then gets doubled because of your automatic critical hits in the opening rounds of combat, and you can lock down enemies. It ends up being less average damage than the Champion Fighter critical hit chance over really long combats, but combats don't go long with this character, because you have all of your crits in the opening round of combat, so you just obliterate them, and the crit chance is somewhat redundant with the automatic criticals you get from Assassin, so Battle Master gives you more options and overall more burst damage, which is the most important part for this character. At this level, it's also worth noting that now that we're level 12, you may want to respec to take 1 level of Rogue and put that into Fighter. Basically, that just gives you an extra hit point for no downside. The reason for that is that you get a feat at either level, and so you can just swap your Rogue level, which gives you fewer hit points, into your Fighter level. Neither class gets anything else at level 4, so you just get 1 extra hit point by doing that respec. If you care enough about the 1 hit point, then that is an optimization that you can do, or you can just leave it this way. It mostly won't matter. Alright, my friends, that is the classic Gloomstalker Ranger Assassin Rogue Archer. This build is a classic for a reason. It does incredible amounts of damage. It's very easy to play. You never have to rest, basically, because only the fighter levels use any kind of resources. So even if your party never takes short or long rests, then this character will still be operating at almost 100% efficiency. And overall, the sheer amount of damage that it brings to any party is just so powerful for getting your way through honor mode, especially on a character that operates so safely. Of course, we can power it up even further by selecting good equipment, so let's talk about that. For items for this character, there's one item that sort of stands head and shoulders above the others as the most important. It's not mandatory for the character, but it does make a lot of the game play out much smoother, and that item is the Graceful Cloth. The Graceful Cloth increases your dexterity by 2 to a max of 20. You'll notice that this character finishes the game with 18 dexterity unless you're using story events to boost it higher. And so the Graceful Cloth lets you hit 20 dexterity while still getting the Sharpshooter feat and having this multi-class combination. So it really helps your character output the maximum amount of damage at very little cost. You can use this in combination with Mage Armor, which will set your base AC to 13 to have 18 base armor class, and you can use that alongside a shield, because Mage Armor still works when you have a shield equipped, and you can still have a shield equipped when you have a bow in your main hand, in order to get your armor class up to 20, which is a pretty respectable amount of armor class. In the late game, if you've used story events to raise your dexterity up to 20 already, like the Mirror or Ethel's Hair, then you can swap over to one of the medium armors that has no cap to your armor class bonus from it, like the Armor of Agility, which gets your armor class up into the mid-20s all by itself, and then you can increase that even further with other items. Items that increase your armor class and saving throws are pretty helpful for this character, because you just don't want them targeted by enemies, and you want enemies to miss when they do target you, so things like the Cloak of Protection can be pretty good. And items that increase our damage are, of course, the most important tools for this character. For our weapon, there's really two choices. The Deadshot, which is more accurate and has better critical hit chance, as well as a higher base damage because of its weapon enchantment, or the Titan String Bow, in combination with an Elixir of Strength. The Titan String Bow will deal more damage per attack, but the Deadshot will hit more often. I prefer the Deadshot, but you can use the Titan String Bow plus the Strength Elixirs in the early game for a pretty significant boost to your damage, because this adds damage equal to your Strength modifier. You will want to not have to use Strength Elixirs in the late game, because you would much prefer Bloodlust Elixirs on this character, or the Viciousness Elixir that increases your critical hit chance, since those both just enhance the core thing that your character's trying to do. But until you get access to the Deadshot, this is the ideal weapon combination for you. Other items that are great are anything that adds damage dice to your attacks. So items like the Helldusk Gloves that add an additional 1d6 damage to your attacks. Anything that adds variable amounts of damage to your weapon attacks gets doubled when you critically hit. So items like the Helldusk Gloves that make your weapon attacks have an extra d6 of damage, that will get doubled when you critically hit. You'll be making 7 guaranteed criticals in the opening round of combat, so that's just an extra 14 d6 of damage right there. That's basically a 6th level spell, added to your opening round Nova, just from having a single item equipped. So you can see how all of this character's abilities work super well together to just one-tap any enemies. In the early game, the Gloves of Archery are quite good. They just give you an additional 2 damage, so you may wear those until you get one of the items that adds damage dice to your weapon attacks. And, of course, you can also replace Dexterity with the Gloves of Dexterity. I prefer the setup with the Graceful Cloth rather than the Gloves of Dexterity, but this is an alternative way to get 18 dexterity, and then you can distribute those attribute points elsewhere. Like, for example, if you want this character to be your party face, you can put those points in Charisma and use the Gloves of Dexterity to gain Dex instead. Finally, another set of gloves worth mentioning, though typically the damage gloves are going to be better. The Martial Exertion gloves let you just make an additional attack And extra attacks are one of the best things that you can do. You don't care about taking the damage because this character is just not at risk of dying usually. And that extra attack can be a critical attack in the opening round of combat. So for maximum burst damage, the Martial Exertion gloves can sometimes outperform the Helldusk gloves or similar, like the flawed Helldusk gloves. But it'll depend on exactly what point in the game you're at. Anything that increases your hit chance, like the Marksmanship Hat, is good, because that will maximize your sharpshooter damage. And then a couple other fun item combos that are worth mentioning. Oh, and actually, the Strange Conduit Ring is also amazing, because it does an additional d4 of psychic damage if you're concentrating on a spell. Very easy to be concentrating on a spell always, because you have Hunter's Mark, and also as a Gloomstalker Ranger, you just get Disguise Self, which is a spell you can concentrate on. Or, you use, Detect Thoughts to cast as a ritual spell, concentrate it on it all day, and you can get that from a scroll. And if you're concentrating it on Detect Thoughts all day, then you can add a d4 of psychic damage to all your attacks, which again gets doubled. A couple other fun weapon combinations. The Drakethroat Glaive can be used to imbue your bow with cold damage, which can then be doubled with the wet condition, and also, you can wear the Snowburst Ring to put in a circle of ice under every enemy you shoot. Now, not only are they taking incredible damage, they're also getting knocked over, and then you'll have advantage on subsequent attacks because they're prone. Other than that, things that increase your critical hit chance are good, and anything that adds damage dice to your attacks. Anything that gives you additional mobility is, of course, also very valuable. And don't forget that weapons, like the Knife of the Undermountain King, that have passive benefits, work on your ranged attacks. So, the Knife of the Undermountain King reduces the number you need to crit on your ranged attacks as well as your melee attacks. So, you can wear a weapon like this to boost up your ranged attacks, and you can also benefit from a shield. Shields increase your armor class, and the Sentinel Shield with the +3 to initiative means that you're basically guaranteed to go before every enemy in the entire game. With the +3 from Gloomstalker, +5 from Dexterity with the Graceful Cloth, and +3 from the Sentinel Shield, you have +11, and the highest enemy initiative bonus in the game is +10, so you're going to go before just about every enemy in the game almost 100% of the time. Alright, my friends, that is one of the most solid, simplest, and most powerful builds in Baldur's Gate 3, the Stealth Archer. I hope that you have enjoyed this look at this character, and if you are looking for a character to help carry your honor mode runs, I can't recommend this one enough. Just really very simple and solid to play, very safe, and will just burst down enemies immediately. Enter stealth, shoot an enemy, they'll be surprised, keep shooting them, you'll critical hit them, and they will die. That's all the play pattern that you need, and it will work against almost every enemy in the game. As always, of course, if you've enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a comment and hit like. Helps me out with the algorithm, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 builds and other strategy game content. Cheers, my friends. I'll catch you next time.